Welcome to another episode of the Three-Man Booth. We're not quite sure what episode it is. It's like 5 or 6 or 7, one of those. Way too high for me to count. But whatever episode it is, welcome. For those of you returning, welcome back. For those of you making your maiden voyage, we certainly appreciate it. We are just 3 broadcasters who don't claim to have anywhere near all the answers, but definitely enjoy talking about broadcasting-related topics, and hopefully you find something interesting, you get something out of it. And as is going to be the case today, we love hearing from you. What topics, what questions you might have, conversations you'd like for us to have about broadcasting, about the process, anything. And we have that. We'll get to the question here in a second, but it's been a while. I've missed you guys very much. It's been like 3 weeks or maybe 4 weeks since our last episode. But Mike Couzens, Ted Emrich, how are y'all doing?
Well, you're the only one who has to wear pants on a regular basis, so we work on your schedule.
Is that really even confirmed? I mean, I am on radio right now. Not right now, but you know.
Big hugs to both of you guys. I've missed you.
I'm glad you came back from Colorado in one piece.
Yes, we did. Took a family trip. We were very safe, but it was much needed. It was good to breathe in that mountain air and do a lot of hiking. We had a lot of fun.
It should be noted, though, that Ted just decided, Ted and his wonderful wife, Kate, not so wonderful people, they just left their daughter in Colorado. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jared. Appreciate that. There's Granny and Papa up there.
Oh, okay.
We don't need to mention that. No, we left the 3-year-old to fend for herself in the Rocky Mountains.
Kind of like early Hunger Games, just getting her ready.
We're training her early.
If you can fight off a bear, you can do pre-K.
Yeah. as a substitute for like normal schooling, we're going to leave you in the wilderness.
That's right.
Figure it out.
Hey, she can already start a fire. It's incredible. And she knows the difference between poison ivy and berries that you can eat. Like very important skills.
I'm fairly confident that Mike doesn't have those skills. I am 110% confident I have nowhere near any of those skills.
Yeah, I get scared if I ride my bike in a wooded area that I've touched any leaf because I have no way of identifying what's dangerous.
Oh, man. All right, so let's get right to it. Ted, someone reached out to you. By the way, you can find us on Twitter at our name. So at Ted Emrich, at Mike Couzens, at Jared Sandler. I think all our DMs are open. So if you've got topic suggestions, questions, whatever the case, please. And this is an example of how your suggestion gets brought to billions of viewers through the Three-Man Booth conversation. So Ted, take away the question you received.
Yeah, I love this question. It's from a young up-and-coming broadcaster in the Nashville area named Lucas Panzica. And he put it this way. Says that he has a relationship with the radio voice of the Tennessee Titans, Mike Keith, who's been a mentor to him. And Mike evaluated Lucas's tape recently and said, I quote, "The reps are clearly paying off. There is more professionalism to your delivery. Your progress, however, will slow down now as you have less mistakes to overcome than you did as a beginner. You must be patient and work on little things." And Lucas's question is, what do you think those little things are? He says, how does a guy like me, 2 years out of college with the basics down, take his call to the next level? What do we think?
Jared, you always ask the question, so why don't you go first?
Yeah.
This is a very different spot for me. I usually like hearing what you guys say and just saying, oh, no, you guys covered it. That was a great job.
Wrap it up.
So, I mean, I think this really is an awesome question. And the answer, or just for like people listening, I think we'd all agree that like that process doesn't really ever end. Yeah, you might be able to check off the basics, but sometimes you slip away and you got to go back to some of the basics. But without listening to Lucas's tape, I think some of the things that stand out, working with an analyst, if that's something that, you're going to do, whether it's on radio or TV, improving the conversation part of that, the intonation, using your voice as a tool. We talk about how important the words are, but also the voice, and whether it's working on pausing at the right time or having the proper level of excitement for a third down pickup in the second quarter, but then also with the ability to take it up a notch for a big touchdown in the fourth quarter. And I think those things are really significant, and maybe what you maybe consider advanced level, not 101, but maybe 303 or 202 or whatever level we're on. And then I also think, for me with baseball, one of the things that stands out is just the phraseology. Now not every sport is the same, but in baseball, you could have between the two teams 15 ground balls in a game, maybe more if you include some of the ones that go for hits. And there's so many different ways to describe the same events. And it's really similar, I think, in all sports, and constantly challenging your mind to think of different ways to accurately or more accurately describe that generic event. The example I think about, like Eric Nadel, who's now in his 42nd year, who I think his phraseology is so good. He was watching Doc Emrich, or watching a hockey game, and heard Doc Emrich use the word skitters on a puck that was just sent towards the boards, not really dumped in, but maybe an errant pass. I forget the situation. And now, Eric heard that word and was like, wow, like I can see that in a baseball game. And now a lot of times on pass balls or wild pitches, they don't just roll to the backstop or skip to the backstop. They skitter to the backstop. And it's almost like when you see it, you're like, wow, like, yeah, that is exactly what I would think skittering would be. And so I do think that, constantly challenging yourself to come up with different ways to describe things. And then the last thing on the prep side, I'm constantly changing. We talked about this with the spotting charts. I'm always challenging myself. What's the best way to prep? And there's not a black or white thing here. This is, that it's subjective, but like, how can I improve my prep? What are things that maybe I've never really pursued before that I can pursue? Or what are things that I'm spending way too much time on this and I don't find the value in it? Or maybe it's not even the prep, it's what you bring to air. It's like you go back and listen, like, man, way too many numbers. Or, man, those stories are great, but not at the right time. I think finding the right timing for the use of all your information is another thing that maybe is that next step.
I'm going to echo a lot of what you said, Jared, because I think it was good. And I had a couple of specific examples that came to mind about having the right energy for plays, right? So if I go back and I listen to my baseball from 8 or 9 years ago, or my basketball from, the first year I started doing basketball on TV was 2012. And I had done it on the radio before that. So it was really just a carryover, but I do a lot more TV than I do radio now. So that's just what comes to mind. But that I was trying to call every made basket with like this great sense of energy. And now I'm to the point where on TV, I don't even call every made basket. So it's been a really big extreme of what I thought I needed to do versus what I think is a best practice now. And so the reason I don't call every basket is because if you're in a good conversation with the analyst, there's no need to say, hey, there's a basket that makes it 46-32 5 minutes into the second half. It's just not going to be a consequential play in the game relative to what might happen in the last 3 minutes of the game. So kind of knowing what energy is deserved by each play. And we're talking about, like, if you've got the fundamentals down, let's say for baseball, right? You need to be hitting inning and score at least once a batter, preferably, on every change of possession in basketball. So, having the right energy too, because I think back to when I started listening to baseball on the radio, one of the things that I loved about listening to the Mets games was that I knew just by the tone of voice of who was calling the game, whether the ball was going to be a home run, like right off the bat. So that's a testament to the people who were announcing the game. It was Gary Cohen and Bob Murphy then. So like you just got like chills right away because you knew something big was happening. So knowing how to moderate your voice for those plays, and part of that comes with experience. And sometimes if you're in a new ballpark, it's really difficult. Or in one baseball stadium I was in, Bowling Green in the Midwest League, you're up the third base line and over you is a roof that sticks out into your field of view. So on any ball hit to the outfield, you're basically just guessing and you had to watch the outfielder to see what was going to happen. So you can't start every ball as here's a fly ball to left field, and then it's a pop up to shallow left. The left fielder comes in to get it. And the other part of that is, Jared, you also said about having the conversation with your analyst. And Ted, I think you and I might have talked about this not during one of these conversations, but off air, offline, whatever this is.
In this simulation that is life.
About just listening to what your analyst is saying and following up on that. Because my biggest criticism that I got this year from people who supervised my work, and then when I went back and watched it, I agreed with those observations, was that when I heard what an analyst was saying, I was doing the listening part, but I was not really responding. I was just reacting. They would say A, and I would say corresponding stat with A, rather than in a conversation. Think about if you and I were talking about the number of chicken thighs bought at the grocery store this week, and you were like, man, I noticed that they were really down this week. The supply was limited. And I said, well, it's actually down 73.6%. And the U.S. Poultry Council, like, nobody needs all the statistics. Just have a conversation like you would as a normal person. Just because you put something on your chart doesn't mean you need to say it right when somebody else mentions something that lines up with it.
Right. Even though it might correspond, like that can be our default setting. We prepped all week. We want to use this note, this really good stat, right? We think it fits, but in the flow of conversation, which, that is ultimately what matters, especially on TV. It should be following up with, whether it be a question or, again, just continuing that conversation. And by the way, just in case you heard my dog Thor whinging a little bit, he's with me on National Dog Day, no less. In our office, the plumber has come, and so I don't want Thor to bother the plumber as he does his work. So sorry about that.
Always welcome. I love the Avengers.
I have two examples for you. Earlier during this crazy summer, I sat down and watched full games of people that I really, really like. And I would think that we're all big fans of somebody like Dave Pasch. And two examples really stuck out to me when it comes to providing context. And I think that's another one that can help you take your craft to the next level, especially on television. You talk about little things. I watched his call of the 2011 Big East quarterfinal between UConn and Pittsburgh. This was the cardiac Kemba call. During Kemba Walker's incredible run with UConn. Of course, they went on to win the national championship, but first they won 5 games in 5 days and claimed the Big East title. So this one goes down to the buzzer. There was just a little moment that had nothing to do with Kemba in the second half that I wrote down. Second half, Alex Oriaki was a big man for UConn at the time.
Yeah.
And he was fighting for a rebound off a missed free throw. And Pasch said, Oriaki has to be careful going over the back with 3 personals. It was just a little comment that provided context. And I think anywhere else, and by the way, he's working in a 3-man booth at the time with Fran Fraschilla and Doris Burke. Talk about a powerhouse group right there just 9 years ago. But it was just a little comment right there that helped provide context, put the picture in the frame for what a key player for UConn was dealing with. Honestly, I wonder how many people would say anything at that point. And Pasch provided that, and I thought it was on point. Another one, I watched his call of the Texas-Kansas State football game last year, working with Greg McElroy and Tom Luganville. And late in the game, Texas is nursing a lead, and he says on a Sam Ehlinger keeper for Texas, that'll chew up some clock, 3rd down, whatever coming up. It was just that little phrase, that'll chew some clock. I think there were 2 minutes left. But again, giving us the situation, being aware of what's going on. It's not just, and Ehlinger keeps for 3, it'll be 3rd and short coming up for Texas. It just, they're keeping it on the ground. They are more dedicated to trusting their veteran quarterback, who is so mobile and who's a major threat on the ground. They're putting the ball in his hands, trying to salt the game away. And so I wrote both of those things down as I was really watching his work, writing down key phrases. What is he saying at this time? What is he not saying at other times? And that's, as we know, another big part of taking your game to the next level on television is of course, the layout, yes, in big moments, but letting it breathe, as we all hear about, but doing it at the right time, on third down, a critical third down in a key situation. That's so important. I just wanted to bring up those two Dave Pasch examples because those really spoke to me.
Yeah. There's two more things that jumped to mind too, of just things that I've read over the last couple of days. One was, I think it was an article in the LA Times about ESPN and Disney's and Turner too, of setting up the NBA compound in Orlando. And Mark Jones, one of the play-by-play announcers, was interviewed for it. And he said one of the things that has been part of his prep is to know which players talk more than others, because there's so much more sound to be picked up. So after a big basket by a player who's more vocal than another, he might lay out instead of saying something because you're going to hear more from that player. The other is, too, of context. Here's a perfect example. Last night, the White Sox, Lucas Giolito, no-hitter. Jason Benetti finishes it off saying, I think it was the 19th or 18th no-hitter in White Sox history. I mean, the things that must have been going through his mind at that point of Vin Scully has called so many great no-hitters in his career, and how do I make this there's no such thing as the perfect call, but your mind is telling you need to find the perfect call. What's the context? Do I try and do what Scully did and say at 7:28 p.m. on this day in August, or do you just say it's the 19th and you get out of the way? There's so many things there. And to compliment Jason as well, Steve Stone, his partner, turned it over for the last at bat and said, hey, it's all yours. And Jason, reflective of their relationship, said, just like the pitcher and catcher battery are a team and partners, so are we. And so it's just those little things, like you said, Ted, in the game that, in my history, I'm sure on that Ellinger type of play, I would have just said it's a keeper for 3 yards and that wouldn't have mentioned the clock. So it's just a little tweak that takes it from good to great and makes such a big difference.
Yeah, I think, I'm glad you brought up the Benetti stuff and to build on what you and Ted said. So you can't possibly, in your prep for a game, have every relevant thing laid out. Like, it's not a part of my prep for every baseball game to write down how many no-hitters a team so so a lot of this stuff is done on the fly. And, it's understanding, okay, I've got, we were talking about commercial breaks, I think it was last episode. All right, I got, 90-ish seconds in between innings. Like, what are the things that I need to look up? Like, I know that, all right, Lucas Giolito, no-hitter through 6. Now there's a tree's worth of things, like last White Sox player to take a no-hitter this deep, or how many total no-hitters in White Sox history. And, he had a lot of strikeouts. So what's the most amount of strikeouts in a no-hitter in White Sox history? And not all of it is necessary. Not all of it is relevant, but figuring out for you and what the moment dictates maybe, would be interesting. You could frame it like Jason did, maybe earlier in the inning or in the 8th inning. Hey, Lucas Giolito already with 10 strike, whatever it was. I think he had double-digit strikeouts. I could be wrong. Most strikeouts in a no-hitter in White Sox history was 11 by Mark Burley in 2000, whatever, but like at the same time, it's to what Mike said, you don't need every single fact, detail, piece of information, but learning and figuring out what makes the most sense as dictated by the moment and the players involved, I think is something that, you figure out along the way. You figure out by watching others do it. And you also figure out by learning what makes the most sense and what you're most comfortable with. I got a question for you guys. So on a smaller scale, last night, so the Rangers are playing the A's, and I mentioned that Matt Chapman tied for second in the majors in extra base hits with 20. We were talking earlier, he got off to a slow start, then went on an extra base hit rampage, and now, from the last time the Rangers played the A's, in which he was struggling mightily, he's tied for second, extra base hits. So, then the next pitch comes. Now, if Matt Chapman puts the ball in play, then you probably are turning the page and, going to the next thing, unless it's routine play. I'm curious. So I ended up adding in a few seconds later, hey, in case you're wondering, Anthony Santander leads the majors in extra base hits with 22. How important is that nugget? Because I know sometimes when I'm listening or watching and someone says, well, he's second, I'm thinking, I wonder who's first.
Yes.
But there's certain, but that's not like who's first? Like, tell me. But there's certain, look at this hair, by the way. God.
I'm doing
glorious. Oh my God.
But there's some people, there's some pieces of information where, okay, let's take the no-hitter. Let's say Jason said, the last White Sox no-hitter came in 2002 or whatever, but he doesn't say who threw it. Like, I'm saying, like, are you like that? You've got to have it. And Jason didn't do that. Jason's as prepared as anyone. But I guess what level of importance is it to complete the circle, I guess, so to speak?
I think it depends on the situation and timing, right? You don't want to, especially on radio, be behind a play to work in the remainder of the notes. But I will tell you, one thing that I have heard Howie Deneroff at Westwood One talk about to announcers, including me, is don't give me half a note. And it's exactly what you're talking about, Jared. If you're going to tease me like that, he's second in the majors in extra base hits, better give me who's first, pretty shortly after, and with how many. Oh, he's only two back, however, whatever. The first player to do this since, and you just say the year, well, who was it? Again, it doesn't mean it has to go into the entire backstory of that last no-hitter or the guy who does lead the league in extra base hits, but it's important for context. It's important for connecting the dots.
It's funny you brought up Howie because he's the person I thought of when, I remember the first time I ever sent him a tape, his feedback was 10 bullet points of that category, who's this and who's that? You said this, and again, so let's say Matt Chapman was up in that situation with two men on and he hits a 2-run double on that very next pitch. Okay, chances are I'm not, maybe I'll get back to it later, but
right.
Now I've got to move on. But let's say the pitch is a strike or a ball or he grounds out or pops out or whatever. That is, I think that's an appropriate time to then add into that note or finish that note. And I do think, I guess, big picture, when you listen back to yourself, ask yourself that question. Are there things that as a listener, I'm wondering based on the things that I've said, are there, and then you start to understand, I think, more mentally in your preparation of what makes sense to put in the extra effort to find and present, because as a listener, you might be interested. You're not going to cater to everyone. Some people are stat junkies. Other people on the other end of the spectrum, some people are they want you to go down an hour-long wormhole, off of one statistic, and that's just not necessarily realistic or what makes the most sense. But it doesn't have to be that extreme. Sometimes it's just taking that extra one step, not extra 10 steps to finish the note, to complete the circle, whatever, however you want to characterize it.
Yeah, you're not going to please everybody, but I think you do want to make it enjoyable for the segment of the audience that does ask the question of what they want to know. So here's an example of that came to mind for me. The last football game I did was the FCS semifinal at North Dakota State. They hosted Montana State. So part of my research was, what have their postseason appearances been like? North Dakota State, we know they've just about kicked everybody's tail. But for Montana State, if you're watching that game, you probably know little to nothing about them if you're not a week-by-week follower. So one of the bowl games they played in 1956 was the Aluminum Bowl. This is a rare bowl game that happened only once. It was played in Little Rock, Arkansas at War Memorial Stadium in 1956 and attended by 5,000 people. So I worked that into the game because I thought it was so obscure as to be entertaining.
Yes, it's fun.
The game was a blowout anyway, so if I talked over a play, it didn't really bother me very much. And so how many bowl games have you ever heard of? Well, I guess today's day and age, it's probably more likely than ever that there's a bowl game that only happens once. But especially because it was the Aluminum Bowl, like just a good name, a weird story. And so that's where I instead of just saying, hey, their last bowl game was 1956, I wanted to go a little bit further with it.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So you enjoyed that, right? Like that was fun for you to work into the broadcast. Like that was okay. So I always tell people this. The research, it's an ocean. You can go in so many directions. Pursue things that are interesting to you. Pursue things that are fun for you. And if you get the feedback that like, hey, you're the only one in the world who finds this interesting, okay, then maybe you reconsider. But chances are, A, if it's interesting to you, it's going to be interesting to someone else. But B, if it's interesting to you, it's going to come off in the broadcast. Like I'll use the Tony Romo example. And I know he's an analyst, not a play-by-play guy, but like I think Tony Romo's best quality is not that he tries to predict every play. To me, that's actually like a negative because eventually that luck's going to run out. It's that he seems like he's having the best time ever calling a game. And I just think that is so important, sounding like you're having fun because the people watching are watching because, maybe they're various levels of intensity based on their allegiance. But like at the end of the day, it's fun. They want to have fun. And if you're having fun, it makes it easier to have fun. And when you have research that is interesting to you, you are going to present it in a way that comes off as A, interesting, but B, fun. And I just think that is so important and sometimes something that's lost. So don't beat yourself over the head with research that you think that other people like that is so boring to you. Because I promise you, when you present that, as much as you might force yourself to care about it, you're not. And it's going to come off in the broadcast.
And an example of that could be, so with your Chapman stat, right? However many extra base hits, no one cares how many of them were doubles or triples, and no one cares how many total bases it is. Like, that's the wrong direction to go in.
People remember those exchanges far more than, again, just random, obviously 3-yard carry in, the third quarter of a blowout. That's how we inform and we entertain as play-by-play announcers. Those are two key words. And the second one is just as important as the first. It is a performance. And if that leads to a fun exchange with you and your analyst, just like you're having fun with your Boston Terriers, is that right?
That's correct.
Nice background on National Dog Day. Well done. Then we're all having a good time. Like my question would be, if I was working with you then, who was the sponsor of the Aluminum Bowl? Reynolds? Like that's a layup, right?
I said to my partner, I said, the trophy for that game was just a crumpled up ball of aluminum foil based on the in-person interest of that game.
Yeah. Yes, or a pointy hat for conspiracy theorists. Well done.
What any final thoughts on this?
I know we didn't really jump into like radio, football, and basketball, little things, just really, really quick ideas that I had there. It's obviously much harder to carry on the conversation that we were talking about earlier in television. Radio, again, you have to be on top of the play. You have to describe every bit, but there are still moments, and I truly believe the great announcers separate themselves from the good ones by the level of conversation that they can still have, even if it's just something as simple like in football, if you have the time, obviously, not accounting for no huddle, hurry up, all of that. But, the big monster running back gets 3 carries in a row and they're just churning up yardage. This is the blueprint. This is what, the coach so-and-so was talking about during the week. It's just that little comment at the tail end of the play that can help set up the analyst before the next play comes. Or, the deep threat, a bomb is incomplete. Like, this is the matchup they were trying to exploit, just little things like that. And obviously same thing in basketball. If you've done your research, you've done your prep, you've talked to coaches or whatever. Again, it doesn't matter the level of ball, high school all the way to the pros. You read, you talk, you prepare. You know what the scenarios are. You know what more or less the game plan is. And again, you can help set the stage. You can help provide context with that. And those little conversational elements with your analyst on radio can help you stand out.
I'm not going to say anything better than that, so I'm not going to try.
Let's end on that. All right, there you go. This has been episode whatever it is of the three-man booth. We'll be back on our normal schedule every other week. Again, at Mike Couzens, at Ted Emrich, at Jared Sandler. We'd love your suggestions. We'd love topics you'd like us to discuss. Yeah, I guess we'll talk to you later.